we're gonna be multiplying integers. Whenever you multiply integers, we're gonna be using this triangle. And we're gonna be using it to multiply the signs or divide the signs. Okay? And that's how you know if the answer is gonna be positive or negative. Okay? And let's start with the first one. If you don't see the sign, it means that number 4 is gonna be positive. Okay? So you're multiplying a positive times a negative. What you're gonna do is you're gonna come to this triangle and you're gonna cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication. You multiply the positive times a negative, that tells you that the answer is gonna be negative. Now that you know that the answer is gonna be negative, then multiply the two numbers. 6 times 4, the answer should be 24. So that means that the answer is gonna be negative 24. Okay, that's how you know if the answer is gonna be positive or negative. Now, look at the next one. Can you see that you are multiplying two numbers that are negative? This is multiplication, by the way. Remember, parentheses means that you're multiplying. So now, negative times a negative, what we're gonna do is we're gonna come over to this triangle and we're gonna cover the two signs that we have in that multiplication. So once you cover it, it tells you that the answer is gonna be positive. And now that you know that the answer is positive, you're gonna be multiplying the two numbers. 3 times 2, the answer is 6. We are not gonna write the plus sign. It's understood that if you don't have the plus sign, the number is gonna be positive. So the answer is gonna be positive 6. Okay. The next one, you multiply a negative times a positive. One more time, you cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication. So we want to cover the positive and the negative. Okay. And that tells you that the answer is going to be negative. Once you know that the answer is negative, you're going to be multiplying the two numbers, 5 times 2. So the answer is going to be 10. And it's going to be negative 10. Okay. The next one more time, you multiply a positive times a negative. So you just want to cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication. And that tells you that the answer should be negative. Once you multiply the two signs, then multiply the two numbers. 5 times 2, the answer is going to be 10. So the answer then should be negative 10. Okay. Try to write this triangle all the time whenever you multiplying or dividing integers. It's very helpful, okay? The next one, negative times a positive. So I have to cover the two signs that I have in that multiplication, okay? And once you cover it, it tells you that the answer should be negative. After you multiply the two signs, then we know the answer should be negative. The next step is multiply the two numbers. 4 times 2, the answer is going to be 8. So the answer for this is going to be negative 8. Okay? Now, let's do the other 5, and it works exactly the same. Okay? So one more time, you don't see the sign, right? Or this right here. So that means that this is positive 3. So you're going to be multiplying positive times a negative. Or what you do is you're going to cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication. Once you cover it, then it tells you that the answer should be negative. Then multiply the two numbers. 5 times 3. So the answer should be 15. So the answer, negative 15, would be the answer. Okay. Next, we're going to be multiplying a negative, and you don't see the sign, right? For number 4, that means that the sign is going to be positive. So you want to be multiplied negative times a positive, or what you're going to do is cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication, and that tells you that the answer should be negative. Now that we know that the answer is going to be negative, then multiply the two numbers. Okay? You multiplied 4 times 2. So 4 times 2, the answer is going to be 8. And that's going to be the answer. Okay? The next one, you multiply negative times a negative. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication. This is negative times a negative, right? And that shows that the answer is going to be positive. Now that you know that the answer is going to be positive, what you're going to do is you are going to multiply the two numbers, and you multiply 3 times 3. The answer should be positive 9. Because it's positive, we are not going to write the sign. Okay? And now let's do the next one. For the next one, number 2, you don't see the sign. So that is positive times a negative. So you cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication, and that is showing that the answer should be negative. Then you multiply 4 times 2, so the answer is going to be 8. The answer, negative 8. And now let's do the last one. Okay? For the last one, you multiply negative times a negative. Okay? So all what you do is cover the two signs that you have in that multiplication, and that tells you that the answer should be positive. And now that we know that the answer is positive, then we multiply 3 times 1. The answer is going to be 3. Okay. Now, one thing that I want to talk about after this is that that's what you use whenever you multiply using this triangle. Okay. Now, if we have more numbers, okay, for example, if you have negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times, let's make it negative 6. Okay. Or what you're going to do is you're going to count how many negatives you have in that multiplication. If the number of negatives is even, the answer is going to be positive. Or if the numbers of negatives after you count them is odd, the answer should be then negative. On this case, count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means that number 4 is an even number. It tells you that the answer should be positive. Now that you know that the answer is positive, you multiply 6 times 1 is 6, times 1 is 6, times 1 is 6. The answer should be positive 6. Now, let's multiply negative 2 times negative 1 times negative 3. Okay? Count the number of negatives. 1, 2, 3. 3 is going to be an odd number. That tells you that the answer is negative. Okay? So then multiply 3 times 1 is 3 times 2 is going to be 6. So the answer is going to be negative 6. So you can do it this way using the triangle, or if you remember all of this, then you should get the same answer. For example, going back to this, how many negatives do we have? Only one. Okay. And number one is an odd number. So the answer should be negative. Multiply 6 times 4, the answer should be negative 24. When you multiply negative times a negative, how many negatives do we have? 2. 1 and 2. Number 2 is an even number, right? So that means that the answer should be positive, and you multiply 3 times 2, the answer is positive 6. So one more time, to get the answer, you can do it either this way or that way, okay? And all what you do is count the number of negatives. If the number of negatives is even in that multiplication, the answer should be positive. If the number of negatives is an odd number, then the answer should be negative, okay? And all what you do is count them, okay? For example, you have 1 and 2. Number 2 is even. That tells you the answer should be positive. In this multiplication, you have only one negative. Well, number 1 is an odd number. That tells you the answer should be negative. And then multiply the two numbers. All right? So you can do it either way. That's it.